Please give it up for Jessica Bauer.
I recently went to prison, but not for the reasons that you might expect. It all started last summer when I was at a movie screening at my local theater in Santa Monica. And the movie that I saw was based on a true story about an acting troupe inside of a men's prison that uses the theater arts to help men who are incarcerated cope with the realities of being behind bars and to process their emotions. And after the movie, a really charismatic man named Major took the stage to do a Q&A with the director and producer. Now, Major actually grew up not far from here in Lawndale. He was 5 years out of prison. He served nearly 30 years on a 30-year to life sentence for gang activity. And he talked about how the acting troupe really helped him process how the gang lifestyle had been hurtful to himself and to many others. But after serving nearly 30 years behind bars, when he came time to get paroled, he felt really unsupported in returning back to his community. So he and two of his friends who had met inside all decided to start a nonprofit together. And their goal is to help other men and other women who are incarcerated prepare for some of the challenges of re-entering back into their community. And he called it the Made New Foundation. The logo is a diamond to symbolize that with enough pressure and enough time, radical transformation is possible. But if you've been anywhere for a long time, especially in prison, it can be really hard to imagine being anywhere else, which is why Major and the Made New Foundation came up with a super innovative way to help transport men and women from behind bars and into different environments, all without leaving the prison yard. And this is through virtual reality. And yeah, it's pretty cool. I had actually never used a virtual reality headset until I volunteered with them. But of all the ways that virtual reality is being used today, I couldn't think of a more worthy or more interesting cause, and I knew that I had to get involved. So fast forward to October, and me, Major, and a few other folks, most of whom had been formerly incarcerated themselves, all piled into my car, and we made the 4-hour drive together from Los Angeles up to Valley State Prison, which is near Fresno. Now, Valley State is a really interesting place, not just because it's a prison, and not just because it was recently featured on Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I'm sure when I walked in, they thought maybe I was Kim, but they looked closer. Valley State is really interesting because it's one of the few prisons in California and in all of the country that is piloting a new model of prison focused more on rehabilitation than solely on punishment. It's a medium security prison, and it actually has what's called a special needs yard, which means that it houses people who wouldn't be safe on another prison environment because of their mental health status or their sexuality or because of the crime that they committed. And it also has a sizable population of lifers. So that's people who are on a life sentence without the possibility of parole. So when we roll up to prison, we weren't exactly sure what we were going to get, what population we'd be working with. But it turns out that we spent the next 3 days sitting on folding metal chairs in the middle of the prison gym with 25 men, all of whom will be coming home within the next 3 years. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. So they'll all be coming home within the next 3 years. And oh my gosh, I'm really sorry. Thank you. They made me go first. This is what you get. Okay, so when the first morning, my job was to go around the circle and to take everyone's names so we could track attendance and participation. And I will never forget going up to the first man and introducing myself and asking him for his name. But instead of responding with his name, he handed me his prison ID card and responded with his inmate number. And that broke my heart because it made me realize just how insensitive the system is, how it can really dehumanize and anonymize the people that are inside. So I met his eyes and I said, "We actually aren't doing that here. We want to know who you are." And I made it my mission over the next 3 days to learn every single one of their names because I wanted them to know that we saw them as people and not as a statistic and not as the crime that they had committed. Now, if you ask your parents or you ask your teachers if they have a favorite, they'll say no. but they're lying. And same goes for me inside prison. All 25 of the men that I met were really interesting. They had their own unique story and personality, but there was one who really stuck out to me, and his name is Harold. Now, Harold and I actually have a lot in common. We're both Libras, and in LA, game recognized game. Harold also has a beautiful head of brunette hair, but he chooses to wear his in a man bun. And he was super hilarious and joyful and flamboyant. And I think a lot to this day about him because I think how hard it must be to be out in such a hyper-masculine environment. I think a lot about how he could retain his spark even though he was in dire circumstances. And I also think a lot about how we were born a few days apart and what kind of life circumstances and life choices led him to this point instead of having a lifestyle that's a little bit more like mine. So on the first day, some of the men were really quiet and reserved. They didn't really know what to expect. And so we started off every day with this exercise where we would put an emotional support teddy bear in the middle of our circle, and we had the men go up and grab it one at a time and tell us how they were feeling that day. And it didn't take long for them to open up. The first man goes into the middle of the circle and he picks up the bear and he sits down with it. And he says, "My mom has an aggressive form of cancer, and I'm racing the clock on my sentence, and I don't know if I'm gonna get out in time to see her again." Another man went into the circle and he picked up the bear and he said that he had lost his entire support system of his mom and his two brothers within the last few years, and without them, he wasn't sure how he would be able to go on. Another man went to the circle and talked about how he had just turned 50, which on the outside is a milestone that many of us celebrate, but he said that for the first time in his life, he wasn't really sure what was next for him, and it made him feel really scared. And then my bestie, Harold, went into the circle, and he talked about how while he was incarcerated, his long-term partner had passed away, and his partner had done everything for him, and he wasn't sure that he'd be able to take care of himself alone once he got out. And if these stories are leaving you on the verge of tears, that's the point. Me too. I almost cried in that prison gym on the first day because it made me realize just how much the currency of our carceral system is loss. Loss of identity, loss of dignity, loss of freedom and of autonomy, loss of community and of family. Loss is a part of our human condition, but it's singularly isolating to face these losses alone while you're behind bars. So prisons, especially in California, they're hidden off in remote towns far away, and that is by design. They are purposefully cut off from the outside world. One of the many ways that our system leaves people behind is lack of access to technology. So a lot of the men that we had met while we were there had spent so much time in prison, they had never used a laptop or a smartphone. And as someone who reached her Instagram screen time limit by 9 a.m. today, pretty hard for me to fathom. So you can imagine how excited that they were to use these virtual reality headsets. And if any of you have used virtual reality, you'll know that one of the first things that you have to do when you put the headset on is set up your personal boundaries so you don't bump into things that are in your personal space. And I was helping some of the guys troubleshoot this feature when I overhear my bestie Harold jokingly say he wasn't sure he was comfortable with us setting our boundaries for him. Touche, Harold. Touche. So over the course of the days that we were there, we showed the men a few different types of content. The first type of content was meant to help them with like conflict resolution and interpersonal skills. There's a scene that we immerse them in which they're at a job on the outside and someone's cell phone goes missing. And because they're the only people that work there that have a record, they're accused of stealing it. And much like the Goosebumps novels that many of us read when we were kids, they have the choice of choosing their own ending of how they might react in that situation. So it's trying to help them navigate some of the challenges that they'll face on the outside, but also to prepare for some of the bias and judgment that they'll certainly face because they have a record. The second type of content was meant to help them understand some of the emerging technologies. But forget Waymos and falling in love with AI chatbots. We were focused on much more practical matters, like how to buy and use a Metro card because they probably won't be able to afford a card when they get out. or how to go to the grocery store and use the self-checkout. One of the modules takes them into a smart public restroom. And I've never seen so many men so excited to flush the toilet and wash their hands. And I wish that there were a smart sensor for automatically putting the toilet seat down. Maybe that's next. The last type of content that we showed them was just meant to kind of open their minds. From standing under a roaring waterfall in New Zealand to scuba diving with tropical fish. One man summoned me over. Jess, can you ask the waiter to bring me a Mai Tai? He was standing on the deck of a Norwegian cruise ship. Another man fully stood up from his wheelchair so he could lean left and lean right, and he laughed as he was skiing through the Swiss Alps. Another man struck me with the simplicity of his joy. I overheard him say, "Wow, it's so cool to walk on a normal sidewalk again." He was strolling through the cherry blossoms in Japan. And then I overhear my bestie Harold say, "Jess, can you remind me where Notre Dame is again?" And as a Midwesterner, I was thrilled to answer this question. I was like, of course, it's in Indiana. Obviously, he was walking through the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and I didn't learn that until many days later, so my bad, Harold. We circled the guys up at the end of our time there, and we asked them how they were feeling. And we heard a lot of similar themes, some of which were, wow, I've never left Lawndale or Inglewood or Compton or Oakland or California. I didn't know that some of these things existed. Some of them said that they felt really compelled to stay on the right track, to not make some of the same decisions that led them to prison in the first place when they got out. And some told us that for the first time in a long time, they felt hopeful about their future. So when I think back to my time in prison, I gotta stop saying that, or just send that to my mom and like nothing else. I can't unsee a lot of things. I can't unsee the cold concrete floors, the small metal cells. I can't unsee the armored stone walls or the huge barbed wire fences that separates the men inside from the free world. I can't unsee the corrections officers with guns on their hips. And I can't unsee the anguish and sadness in some of these men's stories. But I also can't unsee the morning that we walked through the prison yard at dawn and a family of bunnies jumped in front of us. And I can't unsee the beautiful, colorful mural a few of the men had painted on one of the walls of the gym. And I can't unsee some of the smiles of the men who, if only for a moment in that prison gym, felt comfortable enough to relax and let their guard down. And I can't unsee seedlings of hope when these men put on these headsets and for the first time felt like their future could be so much brighter than their past. And so I think the moral of the story is maybe the point isn't to unsee it. Maybe the point is to see past it, to see our collective humanity, and to see that we are all so much better than our biggest mistakes or the worst things that we've ever done, and to see that we are all worthy of redemption and capable of a second chance. So they say that a diamond is just a piece of coal that did well under pressure and I guess got a little lucky. So I hope that every one of you can see past the fact that I forgot my story 2 minutes in. And I also hope that you can see that with a little love and a little polish, every single one of us can be made new. Thank you.
Give it up for Jessica.